So hello everybody and welcome to our Frank Talk today with Tania Farrelly. My name's Katie and I'm from Franksotn City Libraries. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which Franksotn City Libraries operate, the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And considering we're on Zoom and we could be reaching an Australia-wide audience, I'd like to welcome elders from any other communities who may be joining us today. I've just finished Tania's wonderful book, The Eighth Wonder. I've lived in her head for the last 2 weeks, and it's a detailed, intricate, alliteration-filled world, and I thoroughly enjoyed your book, Tania. So take it away, and what can you tell us about The Eighth Wonder?
Okay, so firstly, thanks everyone for sparing your precious hour to spend with me. I thought what I would do today is to take you on a bit of a tour, an armchair tour of old New York circa 1897. So what I'm going to do, if you don't mind, is share my screen with you and take you through a bit of a journey. Now, I'm open to questions at any time. So if you just, I think, write them in the chat, Katie, is that the right thing to do?
Yeah, that would be great. If you pop them in the chat and then we can jump in if there's a moment to ask a question. So I'll just get the chat started so you know exactly where to pop it in.
Feel free to do that. So I'm going to share my screen now. Don't be alarmed if I go off-piste here because I quite often do. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully this will work. Here we go. So the way I thought I'd do it today was to take you on a tour, New York City, 1897 style. I'm going to spend the majority of the time talking about that. Now, if you are more interested in the writing process, that will come later, and Katie will ask some questions about that, and I'll just talk to you about that and also about any questions that you might have around what it was like to write it, how I got published, the miracle that was. So let's start with touring New York City 1897 style. And this is a map that I actually took from a calendar that I own, and it shows you the island of Manhattan. So it's not the whole of the 5 boroughs of New York City, but it's Manhattan. And we're going to start down in the Lower East Side. So you can see here my little elephant icons. We're going to start down Lower East Side, and then we're going to zoom right up Broadway, right up to the top of Fifth Avenue, up here where the rich people live, and over to Newport, Rhode Island. And then we're going to head back to what we call Ladies' Mile, and we're going to finish on what I've called the Wonder Women of New York. So these are the women that actually broke all the molds, broke convention, women like Rose Kingsbury Smith, who changed the face of women's rights and also advocated for animal rights and child labour rights. So they were women sort of out of their time in some ways, and women that we would all still admire today. So let's start with the inspiration for the story. Can everyone see that okay? Everyone's good with that? We're going to start with the inspiration for the story and where it came from, Lower East Side of Manhattan. And I happened to be watching a documentary about the men that made America. Notice the word men there, but this man is Nikola Tesla. He is known as the Dark Prince of Science, and like all geniuses, he was also a little bit mad in that, he had these great ideas for wireless electricity. His great love of his life was a white pigeon that he fed in Bryant Park every day, and he only stayed in hotel numbers whose hotel room number was divisible by 3. So he was a little bit odd in that way, like most geniuses. But his great legacy, and the legacy we still have in our households today, was alternating current. So his idea feeds the households of the world today. But what happened when he arrived in New York City in 1884 with 5 cents in his pocket, just down here in the Lower East Side, is he went to work for this man, Thomas Edison. And Thomas Edison had a different idea about electricity. He had the direct current, which actually was inferior to Tesla's current. There was a big to-do, and there was this war between the two men. And they went to work discrediting each other for many years, for about a decade. And they discredited each other by showing how dangerous each other's version of the electric current was. And they did this by killing animals. So they started with dogs and cats, and then, according to the documentary I was watching, graduated to Topsy. So Topsy was an elephant that actually that's incorrect. The story that was in the document is incorrect. She wasn't part of the current war, but still this story caught my heart. And this is the thing that that made me fall down the rabbit hole of Gilded Age New York. So Topsy was an elephant that performed for a number of different circus proprietors. She was very poorly mishandled in her training, and like most of them, and she did actually kill someone. And as a result of that, she was electrocuted in January 1903 at Coney Island. And I thought that was an odd thing to happen, because Coney Island was known as sort of a pleasure palace of events and rides and the steeplechases and the bazaars and the exotic animals and the sea baths, and this poor elephant has been electrocuted in Coney Island. And it actually broke my heart. And I wrote to my friend. I'd just finished Fiona Macintosh's masterclass, and I wrote to my friend, this is my text message to my friend Marianne, saying, in the meantime, I have thought up a new story that I'm dying to write. I just need a year. And she said, oh, Topsy, how sad. Yes, her story needs to be told. And so I was off and running with the story. That was the stimulus for the story. It caught my heart. It grabbed me. And so I then went about designing this inspiration board. And I looked into Coney Island. So this is the big elephant at Coney Island. This was a hotel. And that was known as the eighth wonder of the world, as was the Brooklyn Bridge, which was built in 1883, also known as the great eighth wonder of the world. This lady was Julia Morgan, who was a woman who did actually become the first woman to study at the Paris Centre for Architecture in 1898. Obviously, Topsy caught my heart. Just try and find my cursor here. And the streets of New York were something that really, I suppose, manifested themselves within me the more I researched the story of Topsy and the Gilded Era. And we've got to remember that this is the Gilded Era of 1890s New York. So we have electricity just starting to be used in homes. JP Morgan, the financier who plays a cameo in this story, his home was the first to be lit up in the whole world by direct current. Broadway lights were running down Broadway by this time, and also across the Brooklyn Bridge. So Broadway was known as the Great White Way. And so steeped in that, and you've got people like Carnegie, Andrew Carnegie, the steel baron, Vanderbilt, Mark Twain, Tesla, Edison, Rockefeller, all of those big names that still chime a century later, all walking the streets daily. And so I did a little vision board. This is my version of Rose, Claire Forlani. Of course, we've got Ethan Salt. My vision was a Hemsworth. And little Lily, my baby elephant, Daisy, the fictional elephant in the story's baby daughter. And just as an aside, if we're thinking, for those of you who've read the story, the manufacturing magnate, Chet Randall, he would be played by Alec Baldwin, who I've always had a bit of a secret crush on, even though he plays meanies most of the time as well. So that was a good one. Don't tell my husband. Okay, so we're in Lower East Side. What's it like in the Lower East Side in 1890s? Well, it's like this. It is an absolute mayhem of what they call rookeries, tenements. You've got horse and carts, absolutely clogging the streets, people with push carts trying to sell their wares, and it's full of a babble of different accents, people from Eastern Europe, people from Italy, from China, from Russia, and a lot of Jewish immigrants in the area. So it's a very poor area, and these people are living hand to mouth trying to eke out an existence because they've come to America on the back of the big American dream and found it not so when they've arrived. So this is the scene that really opens the Eighth Wonder, when Ethan Salt is standing on the edge of his tenement rooftop looking down on this street thinking, I got bigger things planned for my life, and is this it? So, you know, he's a little boy who's thinking big, and he's looking down on a scene like this. And, you know, these are pictures from same sorts of streets. That was Hester Street, but this is, you know, the washing strung across between the tenements because there was no fresh air anywhere except between the tenements, and that wasn't even fresh. And you can see the old awnings, the way the buildings were falling down, and a lot of the real estate was actually owned by the people that lived in grand mansions not two miles up Fifth Avenue. And it was this real juxtaposition that I'll get to that really started to form the emblematic parts of the story, in that we needed some characters from the top end, some characters from the bottom end to portray this culture clash. This is a stairway that I had in my mind when I went to New York. I went to this place. It's the Tenement Museum, and you go up the stairway into a room where people would have sat sewing and trying to make a living for themselves. And this is very much like the Belinsky apartment. Now, the next picture is sad because this starts to bring in themes of the way the animals were treated. And so we need to remember that there were no automobiles in New York City at this time. Everything was horse and cart or locomotive, and the locomotives spewed out great clouds of ash as well on the streets below, a lot of the elevated railways. But this picture, if you don't want to look at something sad, look away, because this is a horse that's been left to die in the streets where it lay, and the children just playing around it like it's something ordinary, and the horses were just left to putrefy until the ASPCA got involved in the 1860s, 1870s, and they started to bring some more humane treatment of working animals to New York City and surrounds, the rest of America as well. And they had these horse ambulances, and so they'd pick up ailing beasts and take them back to try and rehabilitate them. Same with dogs and cats. So in the story, when Ethan is going to the ASPCA trying to get help for his menagerie, you know, the focus of the ASPCA back then was on beasts of burden and the beasts that kind of, the horses and the goats and the mules that helped the economy continue. And here's some other pictures that I had up on my wall while I was writing. This would have been Ethan's fate, probably, had he not met the Belinsky family and run away with the circus. Kids with no parents had very few options. They could be newsies, selling newspapers. Now, the newsies, just as a side aspect, had to go and purchase the newspapers themselves and then earn back the money. So it wasn't that lucrative. This little boy's a shoe shine. So he was a boot black, as they called them, cleaning people's boots. Or you might work for your parents making cigars or paper daisies, all sorts of manual labour, or working as a tailor or seamstress. And if your parents actually had jobs, it's likely your mother would have worked in a manufacturing company like this. This is actually a good one because they've got lights and they've got natural light, but a lot of the proprietors actually shut the shutters of the windows so that the women working on the floor couldn't see the time of day. It's also written down, and in the non-fiction books that I referred to, in the reference books, that that some of them actually did turn the clocks back in the factories so that people couldn't tell the time. 1 drop of blood on a piece of fabric cost half a day's pay. 2 drops of blood might cost you your job. So it was pretty brutal. And you can see there's some men standing over here watching over what was going on with the women. So that gives you a sense of what life was like. And I'm sure it's just a very, it's just a sniff of what things could have been like. But it was pretty brutal and largely caused by this flood of immigrants coming in from New York, from overseas, thinking that they'd make their way in New York. And a lot of them did have to anglicise their names, did have to change the way they lived their lives to kind of fit in with what was expected. Now, if we go up Broadway and then up Fifth Avenue, which bisects Manhattan Island into the eastern streets and the western streets, we get to Fifth Avenue and also Murray Hill, where Rose lived. And we're going to take a trip via our hansom cab, which is not handsome, but it's handsome. And you've got your cab driver on the back, and you would have trotted along in this lovely little carriage, particularly in summer, up past Murray Hill with these beautiful brownstone buildings. This is where I imagined Rose would have lived. This was the parlour she would have sat in doing her reading and hiding her architectural digests from her mother. Underneath would have been perhaps where Thea did her cooking. Upstairs where they had their bedrooms and father had his study, and the beautiful steps and the stoop where Chet Randall tried to woo her. And further up the street would have been much further up than Murray Hill, all the way up to Fifth Avenue towards Central Park would be the Vanderbilt mansions, these enormous palatial residences modelled on the French chateaux. So we've trotted up there, we're looking around, we're seeing that this picture actually's got a car in it, so it's a bit later on, but this is a tourist bus come to ogle at these amazing mansions, and people were besotted by the wealth. And this is a sort of an example of what the wealth could buy, and the inside of these mansions were absolutely littered with pieces of art that wouldn't have been out of place in the Louvre, and beautiful big ottomans. It was also very fashionable, as you would read in the Eighth Wonder, that people had these Turkish areas where they had the Turkish lights and the big Ottoman sofas and the tessellated tiles. So you can see there what it would have been like. And some of them, the wealthy people, opened their salons on an afternoon designated during the week for the also-rans to come and have a look. This is a picture of the Waldorf, which is also something that you would read about in the Eighth Wonder. So the Waldorf hosts the Bradley Martin Ball. So this gives you a sense of what it would have been like to walk into. And this is the South Palms room, again, features in the Eighth Wonder, when Rose and her parents have a bit of a to-do. And this is also where Oscar of the Waldorf would have served his famous Waldorf salad. This is the sort of get-up that people went to the parties in. So, extremely ostentatious. The Bradley Martin Ball, which was an actual ball, it did happen. I got a lot of my information from the New York Times the day after the ball. This man is Stanford White. He's also mentioned, he makes a cameo in the story. Stanford was a rascal, a scoundrel. He was one of the best architects New York had ever seen, and his buildings still stand today. If you get to New York at any time, or if you've been there, if you go to Washington Square, which is at the base of Fifth Avenue, and look at the arch, he designed that, amongst many other very famous buildings. But Stanford would have been in real trouble today with the Me Too movement. And he eventually, in 1905, got shot by an aggrieved husband. Dead, actually, at the top of Madison Square Garden, also a building that he designed. So that gives you an idea of the sorts of things that went on. So you've got this amazing wealth and these people that hung around together in these clubs. Life for the men was awesome. You know, they hung out in the Players Club and talked about electricity and their next great railroad conquest and what real estate they were buying up. But let's remember there was 160,000 horses in New York City at this particular time, and that each horse produced 10 kilos of manure every day. So I just took this from the New York Library, New York City Museum, sorry. Fantastic stat. Can you imagine the smell on a hot New York sultry summer's day? It would have been really foul. And so people got out of New York in summer. And you'll see I pay reference to that in one of the scenes where Rose and Chet are riding a bicycle, and Chet's got the handkerchief across his nose because it smelt so much. It was a summer day. So the rich took off to their what they called summer cottages in Newport, Rhode Island, which is about a 3-hour drive, or it was for me and my sister the day we went, from New York City, or they would have taken a steamer. More likely they would have taken a steamer there. Newport, Rhode Island, as you would know, is the home of the America's Cup, so it's very well-to-do. And these mansions, these summer cottages, were only inhabited for 12 weeks of the year. Can you believe that? And that's it. The rest of the time, they were empty. And so here's some pictures. Obviously, that was when I was there, and just the sort of ostentation, the marble and the statues, and all of that sort of stuff that was going on. Oh, I love the speaking tubes, you know. That's like, James, could you bring me up a pot of tea, please? So that was down to the servants in the scullery. And that's an example of some of the, you know, the drapery. A lot of them were modelled, as I mentioned, on French chateaus. I've written the word vaulted ceiling on this picture because I was trying to remember what things were called. And here's an example of a tea party in action. We had one woman that lived or that stayed, very, very rich lady who was part of the New York society that all took off to Newport, Rhode Island at this time of the year. And she was so rich that she held a party for her pet monkey, and invited people along for that. And they were all horrified to discover that the monkey that she was holding the party for had been called some Prince of Corsica on the invitation. And so people had come along expecting to see this prince, but actually it was just a monkey. She also famously held a party for her pet dog, who got given a $15,000 diamond choker for his birthday. So what did the poor people do? And the poor people took off down this way. So they went where those people went northeast, these people went south. And they went to Coney Island, which is on the very, very tip of the island of the Spit of Brooklyn. And it's got a long history. It had been called Sodom by the Sea, which sounds pretty awful, full of corruption, but turned the Brooklyn cleaned up its civic life, and it became a kind of a pleasure area for New Yorkers and people that lived in Brooklyn for the summer. And so they'd take a steamer again to Coney Island, or they'd take a locomotive, and they'd see things like this. They'd see the Elephantine Colossus, which we refer to in the Eighth Wonder. So you can see there the Eighth Wonder of the world. They would also see things like Steeplechase Park. They'd see these elephants roaming the streets. Oh, that's a video I won't show you. It takes a bit too long, but that's an example actually of Edison's very early, I'll just show you the quality of the quality of the very, very early moving footage. So this is a, you know, actual scene from the outside Steeplechase Park, and people getting around in 1903. and shooting the chutes. You'd go down on a boat, on a long slide. Of course, being in the 1890s, they also liked to put down the chute some exotic animals, some lions and some bears, just for our entertainment. And you'd also see these terrible displays using elephants smoking after his performance on a tightrope, which you can tell, was one of my passions in writing the book was about the mistreatment and the cruelty towards the animals. And elephants, as we all probably know, as thinking people, are also sentient beings and have the same emotions we do. They're maternal. They work in maternal herds, and they grieve for their loved ones too. So just that sort of sparked an interest in me regarding the book. So bearing all of that in mind, this is what life was like. What were women doing? How were women involved in this society? Well, one of the things that is sort of emblematic of this time of period of time was the fact that department stores have come of age. And in New York, if you've been to New York, and if you haven't been, hopefully we all get back there, because it is a fascinating era. But what you find there is Ladies' Mile, and Ladies' Mile was a place where you could walk around the streets between 14th Street and 23rd Street and have access to all these amazing department stores. And you'd get there on an elevated train, as I said before. So these are, steam trains that are spewing out ash, and, be careful if you stood underneath in your finery. And this is an example of the opening of Seeger Cooper department store, which 11,000 people attended on opening day. And you can see the elevated train up there and the people waiting to get in. And inside the department store, this beautiful marble arrangement, you'd have sheet music, and they'd sell, feather hats and all amazing types of millinery. And they had beauty salons, they had cafes on the roof. It was a very modern sort of scenario. Gramophones. But what women were looking for was this look. This is known as the Gibson girl look. And they were looking for lingerie and corsets to squeeze their bodies into 18-inch, to create 8-inch waists. And what they didn't realise, or a lot of them probably felt at the time, was it also squashed their lungs to the point where they would often faint. And they had what they called fainting chairs around the place. So an example of some of the fashions of the era: beautiful leg of mutton sleeves, the tiny waist, and the small S-shaped bustles that they'd get themselves into. And not to forget this this lovely sort of bird arrangement on the hat. Not only did they wear dead birds on themselves and strung across their décolletage, there was a bit of a fancy in the early 1890s for reptiles, and they would put, I haven't got a picture I don't think, but they would put pinned to their chests brooches of lizards and geckos, and particularly chameleons. The rich went for chameleons because, of course, the chameleons would change colour with their outfits. So that was again where ASPCA and other people got involved in outlawing that sort of behaviour. And of course, there was all sorts of rules and requirements of ladies in that era. And when we open in chapter 1 of The Eighth Wonder, we've got Rose poring over the Ladies' Book of Etiquette and Manual of Politeness, not for any other reason but to hide her architectural digest from her mother. And I'm not going to read this out, but it is quite hilarious because stroke sad, because you've got all of these rules about how many times a day they had to change dress. They had their morning dress, their dress for morning visits, their evening dress, their walking dress, their morning calls, their bridal calls, and their shopping dresses. So in between getting changed, there wasn't a great deal of time to do much else. as you can imagine. And there were some women that started to make some waves. And so the Sunday Journal in New York talked about the progressive women. And there is a little payback to that in The Eighth Wonder when Elizabeth Summersby from Harper's wants to write a report on the new woman. That's where that inspiration came from. So if you were a thinking woman, God forbid, what would you do? Well, one of the things that I really loved was the fact that Emily Roebling was the engineer that completed the Brooklyn Bridge. So just in case you don't know, Emily was the wife of Washington Roebling and the daughter-in-law of John Roebling. And John was the man who designed the bridge from the start. He was the engineer. He died, unfortunately, of tetanus. He got injured on the bridge as it was building in the 1870s. He passed the reins on to Washington, who then proceeded to get Caisson's disease, which is the equivalent of the bends, from going down under the water and coming up too quickly. And so he was stuck in a wheelchair in a hotel room or an apartment overlooking the bridge and working with his wife. And the wife took on the duty, Emily took on the duty of actually completing the bridge, dealing with all the city officials, to their great horror and amazement that a woman could take on such a monumental task and complete it successfully. So Emily becomes Rose's inspiration. That's where that came from. And as I mentioned, the Brooklyn Bridge was called the Eighth Wonder of the world. And so there are other Wonder Women who feature in the Eighth Wonder, because this is a time when it was an emerging sense of feminism coming to the fore. So born out of a very long 50, 60 years of campaigning on behalf of a couple of women in the 1840s, 1850s at the Seneca Falls Convention. Again, we mentioned that in the Eighth Wonder with the Seneca Falls soldiers, who were actually fictitious, but were emblematic of that rising feminist movement. So this is an article from the New York Times that actually expounds on Mrs. Roebling's skill, and that's Emily there herself. Little fun fact is that Emily lived and died in Cold Spring, New York, which also happens to be the place where my sister, who is an American citizen, lives. So that was not planned, but a lovely bit of serendipity. So yeah, it just says here, I won't bore you with the details, but you know, they called John Roebling's illness a peculiar fever, which has prostrated him, and that she has studied engineering, and it's nothing short of remarkable. And there you can see a dedication to the Eighth Wonder of the world, the Brooklyn Bridge. Just jumping a little bit sideways, because it's hard to figure out where to put this little story, but at the beginning of the Eighth Wonder in the prologue, you'll see that there is an elephant parade across the bridge. That's in there because it did happen on May the 17th, 1884, and it happened because people were scared of the bridge. They actually got frightened because they'd never seen such a massive structure span a river successfully. And there'd been a stampede and that people stopped using it. And so the powers that be said, how can we get people convinced to cross the bridge again? I know, we'll get P.T. Barnum to traipse 21 of his elephants across the bridge. So Jumbo did come, he did walk across the bridge, and so begins our view of the elephants crossing the bridge in the prologue of the Eighth Wonder. That's where that all came from. And I just fell in love with the language of the time as well. It's just so erudite and beautiful and poetic. So I go on to now Lillian Wald. And I'm just conscious of the time as well. But Lillian features in the Eighth Wonder. At the Henry Street settlement that she founded still exists today. These are pictures taken from the inside of the settlement museum. Pictures of her working with, not her necessarily, some of her staff, working with children to teach them things like as basic as hygiene, right up to reading and writing and arithmetic. But also Lillian's great legacy was that she trained an army of nurses to see to the people, the poor of the Lower East Side, who had no real medical attention, and they'd see here climbing the tenement stairs and going across the rooftops, these young ladies to tend to the poor and the sick, instead of having to go up and down the stairs and through the streets. And it's just a beautiful visual of what happened in those days with the Henry Street settlement. Julia Morgan, I touched on earlier. She was the inspiration for Rose Kingsbury Smith, along with the characteristics of all the other women, the strong women that you see in The Eighth Wonder. Julia Morgan was an architect. She grew up in San Francisco. She eventually worked for many, many years in San Francisco, and she designed the Hearst Castle. That was her great monument amongst many, many others, over 700 buildings in San Francisco she designed, and she was the first female American architect and first ever woman in the whole wide world to go to l'École des Beaux-Arts in Paris in 1898. And so there were many other women I've mentioned in The Eighth Wonder. There was Florence Kelley, who championed child labour laws. There was a real confluence of interesting, strong women that we've never heard of before, coming together at this moment in time. And yes, it's American, but I think it is kind of a sister story to what we know about the suffragettes in London, and it helps us understand what women went through in the times, and I guess what their legacy has been for the rest of us. And so The Eighth Wonder started with these ideas, and it started with the idea that anything new could be called the Eighth Wonder, and there was so many more Eighth Wonders than this around the world, but also the idea that these women were creating their own Eighth Wonders, and that Rose Kingsbury Smith was in search of her own as well. So that's where the name came from. That concludes our tour of New York City in the 1890s, going from the Lower East Side, the poor, right up to the top where the Fifth Avenue Brigade lived. They were called the Silk Stockings, back to Ladies' Mile, and then through the lives in a very short, quick way of some of the stars, the women stars of the Gilded Age. Has anyone got any questions about that content, or any thoughts about that before I just touch briefly on the writing process, and any questions you might have about that?
I'll just scroll across and have a look at if you pop your physical hand up, or do the hand emoji if you want. I'll just have a look. I can only see 3 at a time because of my silly computer. But if you do have a question, just pop your hand up. We've had Tanya Ali's had to step out, but she says, thank you for the fabulous presentation. Sorry she had to leave early. Love the presentation style, and that she was spellbound. So that's nice feedback.
That's lovely.
Okay, I don't think anyone's got a question so far that I can see. I hope I'm not missing anybody.
I'll just encourage you, if anyone, I'm the sort of person that will sit back and not ask a question. And then when someone else asks it, go, good, they've asked it for me. But if you do ask me a question, I love them. It helps me explain things better than probably what I've explained so far. So shall I continue on? Shall we continue on with it's only 2 slides, I think, with the writing process?
Yeah, before we do start talking about the writing process, I'm just so curious. Oh, actually, Lynn has a question. Lynn, you always have such intelligent questions. I love hearing from you. Lynn's just saying that it's such a marvellous presentation that brings the characters to life based on real life events and characters. So that's nice feedback as well.
I appreciate
I just had a question about, looking at Lily and Wald and thinking about their lives and their work towards better education and health options for people. And we were talking about this before we got started. Have we got current day, heroes that women can look up to? Who would Rose look up to if she was, around today?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one because I think there's lots of women. I think Rose would have been attracted to anyone who'd broken boundaries regardless of political standing. Obviously, unfortunately now not alive, but Ruth Bader Ginsburg would have been a huge influence on Rose. I think Jacinta Ardern obviously makes a good one. There are maybe even Greta Thunberg in terms of a more contemporary way to address issues. So yeah, I think any leaders, any female leaders who've had to actually, as we discussed before we came into this, show a modicum of ego in order to get where they wanted to go and where they thought they would be most beneficial to society, because a lot of women, as we know, sacrifice themselves for the greater good and of their families, and there's absolutely, that's to be applauded, but those women go unheralded. So I think anyone that kind of trod their own path, even Julia Gillard, I think, would have been a huge hero. Yeah.
That's right. It's breaking the mold, isn't it? And as you said, sort of stepping outside those societal boundaries.
Indeed. Yeah, it is. And doing the unexpected in a way.
And Peter is asking, is this your first novel?
Yes, Peter, it is my first novel, Labour of Love. I am currently writing my second one, and just a little secret, Ali, who was on before, is actually my publisher. So the pressure was on to do a good job today. But yeah, so back on writing first novel, it was really a passion project for me. I never expected it would be published. I just wanted to write something that had I guess some kind of philosophical point of view, but entertaining. And even if it sat in a dusty upstairs attic waiting for grandchildren to discover it, like in a novel, I would have been more than satisfied with that. But the fact that it actually got published is a thrill that I still am pinching myself about.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, well, that's a nice segue into the next slide then about the writing process itself.
Yeah, I think like a lot of people, a lot of writers that I've listened to, writing something that is in your DNA. And I've got two school teacher parents, and I think reading and writing was very much, in my DNA. And so I'd promised myself from a little girl, from the moment I'd, read The Secret Seven or Mr. Galliano's Circus. If you're as old as me, you would remember that, that one day I would write a story. And I got to, the big 50, and I thought, oh my God, I still haven't done this thing. I've, been busy with my career and raising kids and doing all the things that mums do. And I came across Fiona Macintosh's masterclass. So for those of you who don't know, Fiona is a, very prolific, highly respected Australian author, and one of my favourites. This is Fiona in action. At the masterclass, I was taken from my seat. You can see there are lots of lollies to keep us going, and Fiona's holding court. And it's a 5-day masterclass in Adelaide. And so I took the opportunity to do that masterclass because I knew that there would be craft to writing novels, and then you got to think about the plot and character and characterizations. And I've always loved history, so that I knew it was going to be historical. So I did that masterclass and then got cracking on the story the day after. And actually, this is our graduation picture, and you can see me there at the back. And there's Fiona. And then a few of us have actually been published since too. So that's this lady's name is Katie McMahon. She wrote The Mistake, came out this year. And this is Sarah Clutton. She's written a couple of mystery novels and also a couple of others in there. So that was, and then the process itself was a year of heavy graft. I took 6 months off work. I went to New York. I just took it really seriously. And then I got an editor in to fix up lots of mistakes that I'd made, and I was still learning. And then I submitted it to Ali, who was on this presentation amongst others. I pitched it to the publishers, sent the manuscript off, expecting never to hear anything again. And actually, to my great surprise, I got a lovely email and an offer.
Oh, that's so exciting. Tell us about that moment when that email landed in your inbox. What did you do? Who was the first person you told?
Well, I tried to speak to my husband, who was going on one of his epic walks, and I couldn't get through to him. So I FaceTime I sent the picture of the email to my daughters, who are big grown-up girls, and they FaceTimed me straight back. And I just stood out the back in the sunshine and just couldn't really believe it. Got the champagne out. So it was an incredible, heart-stopping, heart-thumping moment. And then I went into panic because, of course, I'm like, oh my God, people are actually going to read it. So a really funny feeling, and still even, talking to you guys and having you sitting here listening to me is a real thrill.
Fantastic. Oh, that's wonderful. We have Kate saying, such a great presentation. What are the main themes of the novel?
Yeah, great question, Kate. Thank you. The main themes are, I suppose, from an overarching point of view, that women can do. And what I mean by that is that once you've set your mind to something as a female, despite the fact that there's lots of competing forces culturally, family, just get on with it. Just go for it. And that's sort of the overarching thought. And I had lots of voices of women of the past whispering that to me as I went through the novel. There's also a really strong push within that for the feminist movement, and the fact that it is about action speaking louder than words. So, it's all very well to get on Instagram and use the latest hashtag, but actually, no, this is about doing things and having the courage of your convictions. And of course, animal rights is a big theme. So this is about regarding animals, particularly in this day and age when the planet is in such a fragile state, that we need to remember that we are also animals, and we don't always have right of way, and that we need to sort of think about how we can protect animals, not just from an emotional point of view, but from a biological point of view.
Yeah. What can you tell us about what you're working on at the moment? What do you write? Can you give us any secrets about what's next?
I can tell you the era. So it's World War One, and World War One happened to be, and in fact was probably responsible for the spread of the Spanish flu. So they're the two overarching themes in the novel, and obviously, again, strong female voice. I like the idea of showing women through history have actually just gone and done something completely different. And I do love World War II novels as much as the next person. I love, brought up in a diet of things like Leon Uris and all of those stories about concentration camps. But for me, these stories that haven't been told about women who've actually blazed trails in different paths, these are attractive to me. And I like the thought of bringing their legacy to life. So this one also has some interesting ladies involved.
And I think against the backdrop of the Spanish flu, like how topical. And I think that it will be, what an interesting moment in time to be revisiting now. And what's your research process like for that one? Are you, as you mentioned, you went to New York for the Eighth Wonder to walk in Rosa's shoes. So have you got any exciting, I guess we can't plan trips yet, but I wish we could.
I know, thankfully I have been to France and to the trenches and to Belgium to have a good look at, just out of my own interest, what it was like then. And there's some not to mention, having been to war museums and stuff like that. So I'm going to have to draw very, very heavily on what I have already done. And I would love, if we could, to get back to have another look with this story in my mind. So yeah, the research process it's, as we discussed again, it's all consuming. It is 100% takes my attention. I barely read any other fiction while I'm researching. So, at the moment I've got a book that was written in 1921, I think, which is falling apart at the seams about, there's two. There's one of, I think, the 43rd Infantry from Australia, and also one of the 77th Division from New York City. And trying to pinpoint the point in time where these two fighting forces actually came together and fought together. So it's, going down another rabbit hole with this is what I carry around the house, because I print out lots of articles from the New York Times and from the Stars and Stripes, the American Army magazine, and the type's tiny, and I have to fossick around and find the detail.
Yes. Oh my goodness. It just reminds me actually that we've got a workshop coming up that's about recording oral history. So instead of writing down this, and I think that you'd be interested because of your love of history.
Yeah.
And one day imagine, doing a podcast about these women. Oh, I would listen to that all the time. I would love that. Anyway, that's just my just pop it on the list, Tanya. You're on your to-do list of things.
You know what, also just on that point, there is a great podcast called The History Chicks, if anyone's into that, and it is American, so there's a lot of American content, but The History Chicks actually trace these amazing women, all trailblazers, and quite inspired by them.
Oh, I'm so glad that somebody's doing it. People, there's so many cool people doing awesome creative projects. Yeah. So inspiring. Exactly. So Julie is saying that it was a wonderful storyboard presentation to set the style of the story, and that she likes the cover picture. And Lynn is saying that she loves the cover too. It grabs you immediately. And I'm so glad that somebody asked about it, because do I recognise her hat and the blue ribbon from a scene out of the book? You too. That was actually backfitted, that hat. I do. But yes, you do. There is a scene, as we know, made on a bicycle. And so I had absolutely nothing to do with that cover. I wish I did. That was presented to me and by Penguin. It was designed by a lady called Louisa Maggio at Penguin, who just got Rose. I feel like when I saw the cover, it wasn't what was in my head at all. Sometimes that could be a problem, but when I saw it, I thought that girl is the embodiment of Rose's look. Like, I just thought she had the right facial expression, which is kind of a take me on type thing. And then the two elephants in the background, you can just see there. And, sort of peeking out, and then the homage to Ethan Salt's background in the background. So yeah, I feel very, very blessed to have a great team at Penguin, including Ali, who was on this call, and my other editor, Genevieve, who, had to take a debut novelist by the hand and kind of teach her how it all worked. With things like covers or the narrator of the audiobook, how much input do you get into that? I think if you're a famous author, you'd probably get a lot. Yeah. No, that's not fair. The cover was pretty much done, and so I was more than happy. I was thrilled. In terms of the audiobook, I was presented with two options for the both female and male narrator, and I chose Annabelle Stevenson. I didn't know she'd been on Home and Away or was kind of famous or anything. I just chose her from her voice. She is the most perfect. If you haven't listened to the audiobook, I just marvel at the fact that she's able to get all those different accents and bring the book to life. And Leonard Walker plays the male characters, and he also does
sterling job on getting all the characterizations right. So yeah, I got a little bit of a choice in that, but at the end of the day, I trust the experts, and who better than Penguin to kind of steer me.
Exactly, you're in good hands. Lynn is asking, did you choose the title, or did Penguin and you have to have a discussion about that?
That is one thing I did choose.
Yeah.
So I had that from day one. I called it the Eighth Wonder from day one. And most of, you kind of taste test it with your family and friends, and they all just went, oh God, that doesn't sound very interesting. Where's murder or wife or, mystery or secret? And I tried lots of different titles. And in the end, I just went with that, and Penguin liked it. And I think just because it was something different to, the dress, something wife or someone's daughter or someone's lover or whatever. So hopefully.
It's funny. It's like telling family the name of the baby before it's born. You don't really want people's opinions.
Yeah, exactly. It's always a mistake. But, you do. I taste test my work with my husband, and I just sort of look at him while he's reading, wait for, did he laugh at that bit? And then what are you up to? Are you up to that bit yet? Yeah, so it is quite a funny process, trying things out on your family and friends, and then what do you take on board and what don't you? So, yeah.
That's right. And tell me, what are you reading at the moment, or are you not reading anything else because you're researching?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the last really good book that you read? Last good novel?
Oh, look, I really liked this one, Sandy Docker. It's not historical, but the Wattle Island Book Club, I thought that was a beautiful story.
I think I've read a Sandy Docker, but I think it was the one before that.
Yeah, I think maybe the Banksia Bay Beach.
Yes, that's the one I read.
Look, obviously, I also listened to the audiobook of Fiona Macintosh's Mirror Man. I really enjoyed that. That's a completely different genre. And obviously, I really like, I love all Kate Morton's books as well. So, a big spectrum of stories that I like, but nothing, when I'm researching, I really just go straight to the era, and I read stories of the era to get me. I read a lot of Henry James and Edith Wharton when I was writing The Eighth Wonder, and now I'm doing that with the new story.
Yeah, you sort of become the expert, don't you? Like a full immersive experience.
I hope so. That's you don't mean to, but you kind of have to get yourself so steeped that it comes naturally. Otherwise, you'd agonize over every word.
Exactly. Well, I certainly thought reading The Eighth Wonder, there was a sense of confidence in your writing. It didn't feel like you were, searching for the correct word or term or description of, a pillar. It sounded like it was just flowing as though you really were there. So, all that research definitely paid off in making it, a pleasure to read. So a few more comments coming through. A couple of people are saying, so Rebecca's saying, thank you for a great presentation. Really interesting topic, and looking forward to reading the book. That's wonderful, and I'm glad you've included your handles and your. Is there a website on there? Oh, that's Facebook.
Yeah, I've got a website. It's just if you Google my name, I've got a www.taniafarrelly.com. But the others are probably more up to date, to be honest. So.
Yeah. And from Peter, thank you so much. That was wonderful. I'm looking forward to reading The Eighth Wonder. So that's good that it's inspired lots of people to pick it up. You won't be disappointed, guys. Definitely give it a read. I don't typically read historical fiction. I don't know why I don't. It seems strange now that I've said it out loud, because I do read lots of different genres, but maybe I'm a newly converted historical fiction fan. So there you go.
I hope so.
Yeah. So Peter's saying that she loves historical fiction. So yes, go for it, Peter. Do it. So tell us about where we can purchase your book from. I mean, obviously you can reserve it from the library. I know it's on Audible as as an audio book. Where can people purchase it from, Tania?
Yeah, so you can, it's also on Kindle, and I would, if It's in Target, it's in Big W, it's in all your local bookstores like Robinson's. I would urge you to try and support the local bookstores. I know they've done it really, really tough. I took my local bookstore a bottle of wine and that she had a local, and she had her last lockdown, and just, it would be it's a tough time for all retailers. So yeah, all good local bookstores, and if they don't have it, ask for it.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's lots of places you can get it.
Yeah, and it is in stock in Robinson's in Frankston. So I think, and they've set up a really easy to use click and collect system. I have no idea when retail is opening. I don't know what the rules are anymore, but if click and collect continues, it's an easy way to get your hands on it. Julie's asking if we'll get it on BorrowBox, or we've got a couple of other platforms, Libby and Cloud Library as well. I'm not 100% sure if it's there or not at the moment. I'll have a look in the catalogue, the library catalogue. We've definitely got it in a physical book form, but I'll check that e-audio book, and if I can track it down, Julie, I'll send out a follow-up email, and I'll pop a link right in there so you can download it straight away and have a listen.
Yeah, the audio book is the Annabelle Stevenson has just done such a beautiful job. So I hope you enjoy, Julie.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Tania. I think that we've hit the hour mark. So thank you so much for joining us today. And as I said earlier, I hope next time it is in person. It'd be great to chat with you in person. And thank you everybody for taking time out on a sunny day to tune in. And yeah, I hope you all do borrow the book and enjoy it, and then come into the library, and so that I can talk to you about it as well and share other recommendations. Beautiful. Okay, everybody, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Tania.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.